All right, welcome everybody. I'm Wes Warren and this is Greg Stanley, and we are from Whitehall Management, and we're going to be talking today about the headwinds of dentistry. I think we could even retitle this, Greg, self-inflicted headwinds of dentistry. So often, so many of our clients that contact us have been stuck. Their practice have been stuck for a decade, sometimes longer, where there's really no meaningful growth. They get stuck. And a lot of times what you'll find, or what you're going to find today, is it's buried somewhere in here. You're actually doing something to your practice that makes it actually more difficult than it should be. And the whole idea of this presentation is to find out what things you might be doing that's making the job of growth way more difficult. Do I have that right, Greg?
Yes, I believe so. One thing, Wes, first off, you talked about the headwinds of dentistry, and then you referred to it as the head wounds of dentistry. I like that. You probably didn't notice that, but kind of the same thing. So let's go with that. You know, a lot of what this is about is doctors have had some bad experience, made a change, and without realizing it, cut themselves off from a big part of their own market. You know, I one time worked near an office. It was a printing office, kind of like Kinko's is today. And on the wall of the printing office, because they were pointing out that you can get these signs made in this office, the wall was covered with signs that said, "Printing left for 2 weeks will be destroyed. Bad checks will be processed to the maximum of the law." In other words, every time they had a bad experience, they quit being as friendly, as consumer friendly as they were before. We do this in dentistry, unfortunately. So a lot of the things we're going to talk to you about probably relates back to somewhere where somebody took advantage of you and you didn't know how to fix it, so you just cut off that part of the market, probably without even realizing you were doing it. I think one of the first ones is no insurance. Insurance is proven to be a wily bunch. They keep cutting. They don't just cut our reimbursement. They make some comment always about whether or not the patient really even needed that to begin with. In other words, they come at us in some way. Now, the answer to that has proven to be, in a lot of practices, the membership plan. We've seen doctors actually were able to save themselves in the crash of 08, 09 by taking on membership as their practices were plummeting to earth. So you have a bad experience with insurance. They insult you by saying you don't even know what you're talking about as a dentist, cut reimbursement, and they have this ability to pit our patients against us, till the patient tends to want to side with them when the insurance says you don't need the treatment. What this guy's, yeah, we'll pay 80%, but not of the ridiculous amount this person's charging. In other words, they pit them against us.
The question would be, that I get asked, Greg, is you saying I can't grow without insurance, being out of network? No, you can't. It's just much more difficult. You got to do everything correct, and you've got to run it so well. It makes it a headwind. You're stacking the deck against you, really.
Right. The idea that you can just grab 15 staff off the street, train them up a bit, get things running. You can't throw insurance. That's throwing the baby out with the bath. You get rid of the insurance without the staff Wes is talking about, it's a terrible thing.
It's a headwind. It makes your job more difficult being out of network if you're really looking to grow. If you've got open chair time and you're really looking to spool up, this is definitely a headwind. This makes it more difficult, no doubt.
Another one, high fees. And high fees may just be your fees, not high fees. You feel entitled to it. You worked hard to get through school. You were a top student. You're even a top dentist. But know this, the higher your fees as a percentile of the market or of the industry, you'll be appealing to a smaller and smaller group of people until at about the 90th percentile, typically in most, unless you're in, the dot-com valley or something, you won't have enough people to keep your practice afloat, even at high fees. And one of the downsides of high fees, people naturally assume that though they may like you, whoever they would refer to you probably won't feel good about paying the money. So they don't refer, they don't take the risk.
So yeah, you could be fooled thinking that my patients love me, they accept the fees, and they do, but they don't go home wholeheartedly singing your praises to their neighbors that you got to go to my doctor because they know it's a little bit higher priced, and I'm not going to put myself out there with friends and family.
Let's talk about this, Wes, as headwinds. Let's add it to no insurance,
Yeah, right.
high fees, and pretty soon the roof starts rattling, like it's going to blow off.
That's
Let's
right.
talk about let's go back to high fees for just a second. We found that our doctors that were in the 55th percentile into up to the 75th percentile tended to be able to grow regardless of other headwinds we're going to talk about. In other words, those were fees that gave them access to a big part of the market. So, this is something you may want to call and talk to us about. We'd be glad to discuss it with you. There's a formula that goes with each of these things you can do, things you can't do, but I can tell you this, anything in the 80 to 90th percentile added to no insurance,
It's a major headwind. It's
you're
a
going to
headwind.
have some offering that's just priceless to people.
It's a headwind if you are in insurance. Obviously, you're contracted, but the other people that are outside of it, and it makes it difficult, makes it hard to grow.
All right, deposit required for appointments. Again, this is the little plaque on the wall. Printing will be shredded after 2 weeks. Somebody made an appointment with our office, and it was for a good case. In fact, it was for a family of 5. It was for all of that. They didn't call, didn't show, and just blew us off. So now we're going to charge people a deposit for their appointment. I have to tell you honestly, Wes, don't run into that as often as I used to. However,
it's on the list.
It's one of the things you can add if you don't think the winds against you are strong enough. Throw this one on there. You'll really know about headwind. Payment required in advance for treatment. If you've ever been shafted on this, the temptation is there to make people pay up front.
Or collect your own insurance check. In other words, you pay us, we'll give you a bill, you send it in yourself to your insurance, you deal with insurance.
Yeah, that works. You can do it, but again, you'll feel the headwind. Smaller market. Typically, we see people survive pretty well with half up front or 25% up front or something like that.
On larger treatment, yeah. But when you start to make them do their own billing and you collect all the services and they got to wait for their check, it's a headwind. It's more difficult. It makes growing the practice more difficult.
Let's look at this again from another standpoint. You acquire some portion of the money up front. Typically, we don't do this to returning patients, but maybe you do. You've got some hard and fast rule. Remember, they're going to be happy. They know you're good for it. You're going to deliver great work, but never forget, they have to go home and sell somebody else, a co-worker, somebody. They've got to sell them this. And oh, by the way, you'll have to pay half up front or everything up front. Right. I'm just probably not going to refer if I have to include that.
Oh, this is death. This is we're seeing this left and right in dentistry. It takes forever to get an appointment into the practice. Yeah. And what does forever mean? So a lot of people think it's good. Hey, I'm down to 6 weeks. It used to be 8. We're doing good. You have to be able to get people in really quick, especially new patients. It sets the tone for the patient experience. So new patients, you got to get in with 1 week or quicker. If you can't get them in within 5 business days, all patients, unless the rare occasion that somebody calls and they're going on vacation tomorrow, that's about it. Everybody else, your schedule and their schedule should line up within a week or less.
Some of the
Otherwise,
dental elitists love to be able to tell people it's 3 months before I have an opening. They love to brag at conventions that they were in effect a sellout. They had sold out the seats. They were in the big time. The problem is it just doesn't work for a patient. A patient wants to get in for their problem immediately, and they can find another dentist pretty darn fast today. So don't fall prey to this. I know some of you feel like it's a point of validation. I'm just like an ice cream sundae and there's not enough spoons. I'm so popular. Everybody wants to be in my office. Get in line. You're lucky if you can get in here. No, today we're going to have to be able to sound busy, but get people in tomorrow. At the end of the day, we got to get them right in. Some doctors don't want to acknowledge this. They want to say things like, there's no such thing as competition in dentistry. The fact that you can even say that means you haven't faced it yet. Typically, people live in areas where there's one dentist for 1,250 prospective patients. And once it gets worse than that, like 1 per 700 or 1 per 800 or something, it becomes like a fight for patients. You have to go lower and lower with your barriers to entry. You got some kind of $39 x-ray exam, maybe even the cleaning. In other words, you have to keep throwing things in to get your share of the market.
yeah.
You'll see somebody in the plains of Wyoming where there's 5,000 people per dentist, and they'll say, oh, I just had my grandchild make up an ad with a crayon and it filled the office. Yeah, I believe that, because there's no competition. There's no alternatives.
This is a big one. This can fool a lot of people. And, you start talking to your neighbor, your classmate that you went to school with about practices, comparing notes. And this right here can be the reason why it's hard for you, easy for them. It could all really just be about this. You're doing everything right and you're growing, and they're doing seemingly everything wrong and they're growing faster. This matters.
Let's go back to Headwinds for just a second, Wes, and talk about that. If this one gets bad enough, I think of a doctor that we worked with in Colorado. He had one dentist per 200 prospective patients. That's worse than being a lawyer. It's really incredibly hard. Throw into that, not taking insurance, having high fees. Can any of you see, as you hear this and see this, can you see how you can finally stack the deck against yourself and end up with a hand you literally can't play?
Yeah, you start adding this up. You're lucky you're not going backwards, really.
Hidden location. Now, there are places in the country that people expect to hide and people find you. They find you, like in Honolulu. You're on the 10th floor, the 20th floor of a high rise. Yeah, they'll come find you. They expect that. But in other parts of the country, if you're too hard to find, at some point, people will just go off and run a few more errands and make a different appointment with somebody that they can find. So if you have a difficult to find location, acknowledge this for what it is. Believe it or not, Wes, some people want to even flout this in the face of disaster by saying things like, I'm so good at what I do. I'm so valued by my patients. They'll find me even if I'm in a hole in the ground. Yeah, well, I'm telling you, you are headed for a hole in the ground if you can't fix this. You add up the headwinds of hidden location, no insurance, high fees.
That kind of dovetails into hidden location. It's very similar, is the lack of parking. This is where, your patients drive in, and it takes 2 or 3 minutes every time to find a spot, and they have to walk real far. It's just a hassle. In their mind, they'll start thinking of reasons not to go to you.
Let's talk about that. People will do quite a bit to see the dentist, but to come into hygiene every 3 or 6 months, you better have a parking place.
Right. You're creating a situation where people start thinking of maybe I won't schedule, or they're
Yeah.
just, yeah, just a little bit inconvenient and it works against you.
This one happens when a doctor goes to a convention and hears somebody talking about something they're just doing great with in their practice. And it sounds like what they wanted, some high level, high end TMJ, Athernactic or whatever. I mean, they get into these real,
Narrow marketplace.
yeah, the market is so narrow. Can you afford to advertise that,
Yeah, well, we see practices just like this where you get passionate about, let's say TMJ. It's a good one. And if you haven't figured out the marketing of it, you can't tell that story to everybody. Obviously, not everybody has it. Not everybody has it to a degree that they're willing to do anything about it. The sleep apnea thing, another thing where you kind of in a narrow marketplace. And if that's what you're excited about and you're talking and that's all you're talking to patients about, you're going to find this as like a headwind. You're going to be having trouble really getting traction to grow. And we see this a lot, kind
Yes,
of.
me, I think this one's a deal breaker. I had a doctor trying to sell sides of beef to every patient. He was an associate. And, speaking of beef, I can get you a side of beef. He was always trying to get the conversation around where instead of doing dentistry, he could talk about something he was high on. So be careful what you're high on and make sure that what you're really high on is what patients came for.
And this kind of goes hand in hand with this, because when you're really high on something, you tend to overdo it. You kind of push it a little bit too much. And you can be overly revved on general dentistry and want to do, quadrant dentistry when your patients aren't really ready to do it. One of the number one indicators of this is your referral count. So this is patient to patient referrals. How many are you getting per month? You should be getting 15 to 20 every month, no matter what practice you have. And you slide below or near 15, there's usually an indication that something's wrong. And a lot of times it's one of these headwinds, and this is the number one culprit.
I had a doctor tell me that the reason he only got 4 patients a month, none of which were referred, was because his patients who were very happy just didn't know anybody with any money.
Yeah, I heard that was there. I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty thin rationalization. This one is a good way to just finish yourself off. You let your overhead get high to the point there is no money for marketing. In
Would
other
this
words,
be your personal overhead or both?
this one would be whatever biscuit sops up the marketing gravy. A lot of times, a doctor will just count on referrals. It's going to be a referral game. But then he steps in the bear trap of one of those other headwinds we talked about, those things that kill his market. Now he needs to do some marketing. Maybe he hired an associate. Now he needs to buy some patients, and there's really no money for it.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of how this can happen. One way is you lose a highly valued, capable employee, staff person. She's like your right arm and you're right-handed. I mean, it's like a bad thing. We don't want to lose anybody else. So every time somebody comes through the door, we just give them more and more raises until that part of the practice is out of line. Wes, kind of in the end, this only happens if some part of the practice gets out of alignment. There's you talk a lot about labs and supplies. We talk about the cost of the space, the cost of the staff at 24 to 27%, maybe 28. There's these percentages. When you get outside of them, you make those mistakes. Now you can't compete. Maybe you're in a market where there's one dentist per 1,250 people. You should be able to compete, but you can't. You can't reach out with your offers. You just sink.
And any rule of thumb on marketing budgets? I've heard a lot of different numbers. Anything that you?
Well, when we have an associate that we're trying to fill, we think about 5 to 7%. If we have a practice we're trying to build with no owner on the premises, it's all associates, we might go as high as 10%. But most of the practices that have an owner present, even with an associate, it's going to be between 1 and 3%, I think, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, I would say that that's pretty common. You have to be prepared to hit the growth, to get the growth trajectory going, to really ramp it up to where it is 5, 6, 7, 8%.
Right.
But eventually it should obviously come back down to where it is more like 3%, or even less. Yeah. This is how so many people probably feel, I'm the only one that really cares. I'm the only one really driving the production of the practice. I'm the one solving all the problems, making sure that we're collecting the money, that we're not making mistakes with billing, and on and on and on and on. All the little things that happen. Most
This,
doctors feel this way.
this reminds me of a practice you and I were in Texas, where the doctor had a radio. So many do, but he literally ran the practice while he was doing dentistry. He was telling people at the front how to cut a deal on a large case. He was telling people to quickly follow up on a certain patient. In other words, he was driving the entire practice. There's something, Wes, that you pointed out to me in the last few weeks that has stuck in my mind. And that is, you told how people, staff, can use a script, exact scripting, and get a different outcome from somebody else who uses the same script.
Yeah.
In other words, the doctor might teach everybody how to take the load off the owner, and they go through the motions, but the load is still on the owner. Can you comment on that?
Trying to get scripting in an office, we want things set a certain way where we know the results. We've done it hundreds of times, so there's no doubt that the script works. And in certain offices, we'll introduce it, and one team member will get one result, and another person will get a bad result. Really,
Same script.
Same script. Swear up and down. We can actually listen to the recordings. It's the same script, but it's how they deliver it, how they slow down their voice, how they inflect to create the mind to focus on what they're saying. And all it is just little things, and how they say things to the patient make the difference. And if they're not mentally present and really focused and going through the motions, you won't even know it. And you can sit there and listen to it and think, hey, they're delivering the script. I don't know what to tell you. It's just that last little bit of really caring.
The engagement.
To deliver it so it doesn't sound too canned.
Though we're not going to cover it now, that probably leads into the whole world of bonus science.
Yeah, you got to get that right. If it's all on you, part of it is getting the bonus to the point where there's enough people pulling in harness for the bonus that you stop feeling, like it's all on you.
Let's pull back for a second. Take a doctor who's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and no one else is pulling in harness. Those other workers will still demand a raise and a raise again, as opposed to really pulling their load.
Well, they all think they're hitting hard. Like I said, I'm delivering the script in their mind. And when you record it and you listen to it, it all sounds right. You know what I mean? But there's just a little something missing, and you really can't coach. It's hard to pinpoint it. And you'd have to listen to every phone call and critique every phone call, but you can't do that to every system that this person's working on. It's impossible. But they really do feel like they're doing it. You didn't pull the trigger when you're supposed to. Add an operatory, even change buildings. You just get stuck in a practice. Practice is full, but you never really expanded when you should have.
I think too many doctors mean to do this at some time. And you know what they're waiting for? They're waiting to see the reception room jam-packed with people willing to spend an hour or so waiting for them. And then, maybe I'll get another operatory or add an associate or whatever. It doesn't work that way. You get the op, There's seldom, in my memory, probably in yours, few times, if ever, we see an operatory added that doesn't immediately fill. Yeah. So you're a success. How would you do against these odds we've outlined? Let's face it, different practices are up against different situations. You know, I know this is the headwinds. I want to throw in one more that's actually kind of put on you and you don't even know it. That's the average person wants to get their teeth cleaned. This came from a national survey. The average person wants their teeth cleaned every 18 months. And we try to get them in every 6 months. You know, if you're experiencing some of those other headwinds and you start really leaning on people to come in every 6 months to the point you get nasty about it, that's going to be a bad outcome. I can just warn you right now. I'll tell you another one. Now that we're talking about these, be waiting for insurance pre-approval. The doctors that do this lose a big percentage of their following in the 70 days that it takes to finally get that all turned around. The patient has found another doctor, moved to another town, or forgot about the problem.
Yeah, getting pre-estimates from insurance is a kiss of death, obviously. So, and not guesstimating what insurance is going to pay, and either doing the best you can and cut checks to the patient, back to the patient. Usually, that's the way you want it, but occasionally we have to chase a patient down for $50 or $80. Doctors will be tired of that. We screwed that up and we're having to go chase down, $100 from I don't know how many patients. And they say, we want to have everything pre-authorized, done with this. Well, it cuts case acceptance down dramatically when you do that. So that would definitely, and you add this up, and you know what's funny, Greg? There's a lot of people that they got versions of every slide going up. Maybe not to the max, but they got a tough competitive challenge ratio. They're pushing maybe a little bit too much on multiple crowns on one patient, and their fees are on the higher side, 80th percentile. They're out of network with a lot of insurances. And they add it all up and they go, yeah, and I'm the only one in harness. I have no bonus. I'm the only one pushing. There's no bonus for anybody, so nobody else is pushing. They add it all up, and it's death. I mean, the practice just stalls and doesn't never grow.
You wake up one day and you're living in dog years. You've been in practice 15 years and you're ready to quit because you're exhausted. You've given it everything you can think of and you didn't grow. Now you might have a clue why it's been so difficult. And you don't have to stay like that. There's changes you can make. Just because somebody cheated you out of something doesn't mean there's a way you can do that and still keep your market. You can.
There are practices that make it, that stay out of network. There are practices that do TMJ work, but it's just a way of doing it so that it doesn't stack it up against you. These headwinds. So there's always workarounds with each one of these, but it's a conscious workaround.
I know you took lessons in sailing at one time. What did you learn about sailing into the wind?
Well, you got to tack. Yeah, you got to go you go left and right. You can't actually go straight at it. You kind of go at an angle, and obviously the way the sail works, it actually creates a vacuum effect. It's actually pulling you forward. But
well, that's what it's going to take. I say, to the degree possible, we get the wind at our back.
Yeah,
that is something
much better. Yeah,
we work with our clients on. We try to pinpoint which of these problems they've just kind of assumed they're stuck with, and they've given up to trying to deal with it, and try to undo it and get them moving again. Wind at their back. You can almost see them, if I could use that terminology, see them get younger as life gets easier.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So if you're having problems with any of this stuff, feel free to get on our schedule. Contact Lori at Whitehall and say, hey, they were talking to me. I need help with this stuff. We'll be glad to walk through workarounds for each one of these things in your office. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.